Hi there! Welcome back to Bio24 and our Venom and Toxins lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about venom, toxins, and poisons. Now, some of the images you might see in this lecture might be a little frightening to some of you. None of them are gory or anything like that, but you will see some pictures of snakes and spiders and so forth. So if you're a little sensitive to images of dangerous animals, you may want to just avert your eyes and listen to the lecture. It's up to you. First, let's start off with some definitions. Poisons are any substance that can cause harm to a living thing. These substances can be natural or artificial. As long as it causes harm to a living thing, it's considered a poison. Within that category are toxins. Toxins are specifically poisons that are produced from living systems and are not man-made. Finally, within the toxins category is venom. Venom are poisons that are purposefully injected from one organism into another to cause harm. They are then, by definition, toxins as well, but they are injected from one organism into another. So a venomous insect would bite and inject a harmful chemical. This is like a bee or a wasp. Whereas a poisonous insect would be dangerous if eaten, but does not inject any poisons into another organism. This is like a monarch butterfly. It helps to have a consistent means by which to measure toxicity of different chemicals. The way that we measure toxicity of different chemicals is using a factor known as LD50. LD50 stands for lethal dose 50%, and this is the minimum lethal dose that's required to kill 50% of organisms that have been tested. The lower the LD50, the less of that chemical is needed to kill half of the animals it was tested on. And if it means that there's less of the chemical needed to kill half of the animals, it's more toxic. The higher the LD50, the more of that chemical is needed to kill organisms, so the less toxic it is. We're going to talk about botulism in this lecture toward the end. That is a poison or a toxin, and that creates the most potent neurotoxin known to man. It has an LD50 of 0.001 milligrams per kilogram. And what that means is that you just need 0.001 milligrams of the drug, botulinum toxin, per kilogram of the organism in order to kill half of the organisms. In comparison, caffeine has an LD50 of 150 milligrams per kilogram. So you need orders of magnitude more caffeine than botulinum toxin. You can see that in this chart here. Caffeine hovers right around here, which is considered very toxic. Down here is the botulinum toxin, which is the most potent neurotoxin known to man in the super toxic category. This goes all the way to water, which is also on this chart because organisms, animals, and humans have died from consuming too much water. In this case, water has roughly 90,000 milligrams per kilogram, making it practically non-toxic. Thus, with a high enough number, most things can be considered toxic. Sort of abides by the rule of too much of anything is bad. LD50 can be tested on organisms, on lab animals, and they can be tested using injection, inhalation, or ingestion by feeding the organism the toxin. These different techniques can mimic envenomation by being injected into an organism, breathing the poison in, or eating it. Commonly, test subjects would include rats, mice, rabbits, dogs, or primates. However, experimenting on lab animals is becoming less and less common as the ethics of doing so are more in question. And as a result, some LD50 is given for humans. If you do see an LD50 for human beings, those assessments are all a result of accidental exposure. There is no intentional experimenting on people. The first subject that we're going to talk about is snake venom. Here we have the most venomous snake in the world. It is the inland taipan, which is pictured here. It looks quite scary from this image, but in fact, it rarely takes on that behavior. The inland taipan is called the inland taipan because it's found in the inner regions of Australia, specifically the Central Eastern region. Now, the inland taipan has an LD50 of 0.025 milligrams per kilogram. That's in comparison to a snake that you are more likely to encounter in your lifetime, the Californian rattlesnake, which we'll talk about in a moment. That one has an LD50 of anywhere from 2 to 20 milligrams per kilogram. So 100 to 1,000 times less toxic than the inland taipan. Now, the inland taipan has yet to kill a single person on record. And that's because, as I mentioned, the inland taipan lives in the inner regions of Australia where very few people inhabit. In addition to being in an area of Australia where very few people live, the inland taipan is also very shy and not aggressive. And so, as I mentioned, this picture that you see here is pretty rare. Usually these snakes are likely to escape any interaction with people and not engage a single person. On the other hand, the Californian rattlesnake is not as deadly, but about one person every year dies from a rattlesnake bite in the United States. This is because rattlesnakes live in areas where people live and play. In particular, these images that you see here are pictures that I've actually taken myself. This first one is when I was rock climbing and a rattlesnake actually fell from the cliff face onto our climbing rope and climbing bag while we were climbing. In this second image, I took this photo while I was trail running right by our college campus. In neither instance was anybody hurt, but it's not uncommon to have interactions with rattlesnakes if you play outside in California or anywhere in the western US. To make matters worse, because humans live in areas with rattlesnakes, a lot of people do end up being aggressive, teasing the rattlesnakes, and playing with them. And that's how most people get bit today. In fact, just last year, someone died as a result of trying to take a selfie with a rattlesnake here in California. It's human behavior then that really leads to whether or not humans die from rattlesnake bites. Now, in both cases, the rattlesnakes or the inland taipan or any venomous or most venomous snakes will usually inject their venom by fangs that sit in the mouth of the snake. Though some snakes have the ability to spit venom out onto their prey. The snake venom in all cases originally evolved from saliva and is often delivered from modified salivary glands. Venom is often comprised of more than 20 different toxic compounds, most of which are proteins. a combination of many different compounds that work in lots of different ways to kill prey make venom very difficult to treat. Different functions of the proteins found in venom can include blood coagulation, which causes blood to form clumps in the body, stopping the flow of blood, leading to a heart attack or stroke. Other types of proteins in other snakes can cause the opposite and lead to hemorrhaging, which damages blood vessels and allows for blood to leak out of the blood vessels and into the body cavity. Other proteins can alter blood pressure regulation or block transmission of neuronal signals, causing loss of muscle control, paralysis, an inability to breathe, and death. Still, other proteins break down cell membranes, killing cells, especially the red blood cells. Let's go over some examples of these various venom proteins. The first one is fasciculin. Fasciculin prevents the breakdown of acetylcholine, a very important neurotransmitter in the brain, used to stimulate muscle contraction. Fasciculins in snake venom stop acetylcholine breakdown. This causes the muscles in the body to remain contracted. This is a state known as tetany. Tetany is when muscle cells are constantly contracted and cannot release. The animal is then unable to move and is in a type of paralysis known as rigid paralysis. Dendrotoxins increase the amount of acetylcholine released by neurons, keeping the muscle cells in a contracted state and leading also to rigid paralysis. Likewise, alpha neurotoxins mimic the shape of acetylcholine. So while they don't change the amount of acetylcholine produced or released in the brain, they act like acetylcholine and bind to muscle cell receptors, causing the muscle cells to not be able to detect acetylcholine. This makes the muscle cells immune to acetylcholine, so they cannot contract. Flaccid paralysis is the result. Phospholipases are a different type of enzyme. These attack and destroy phospholipid molecules, which make up cell membranes in all cells. The phospholipases destroy phospholipids, thereby destroying cell membranes, which kills cells of the body. Cardiotoxins, as I'm sure you can tell, attack heart cells, causing irregular heartbeats and death. Myotoxins inactivate muscle cells, again leading to paralysis. And finally, hemotoxins cause hemolysis, which is the destruction of red blood cells. There's only one action to take if bitten by a snake. Doesn't matter what snake it is or where you're located, the only thing that you should do is immediately and deliberately find your way to a hospital to obtain antivenin. We're going to be talking about the action of antivenin at the end of this lecture. Importantly, it is a waste of time to try to suck out the venom, cut out the venom, tie off the limb, or do anything else that you might have heard could help with a snake bite. The only thing you should do is get to a hospital and get antivenin for your specific snake bite. Next, we'll talk about spiders.